Blog Talk Radio.
Black jeans, black tee and the black fitted, black tinted windows fitted, on the black Civic, black man to make them disappear like black magic. I don't care if you red, white, blue, or black flagging. Still get my ones on the block with my pants sagging. Black bragging put in the back of a black wagon. Black hearses line up for y'all with whack verses. Black writers that'll get him a whack murder, but it's more to this rapping and getting them clap murders, spitting nothing but the truth. Show you this cat nurtured. I came a long way from upbringings in black churches. Black Jesus, staring at black pictures is ghetto genocide due to a black Hitler. How long I got till my life fade to a black picture? Black visions from up to the snack cowards, holding my fist up from screaming for black power. Wasn't a whack premise to enter this black business till an art form of rap changed to a whack business. Quite tragic, more wicked than black magic. While rappers sold themselves out, them black bastards. I'm real on the mic, kept giving me cat calls. I say, I'm getting you blackballed, middle finger to the world. Oh, is that all? On my knees, I'm making these cats crawl. Part of the black wall, not the Dow Jones Homes or the NASDAQ. But cats know I'm a hazmat, the ass rap. You stereotyping black-ish for racist or black king. I never been a black prince until black visions from a brother that smack cowards, holding my fist up. I'm screaming for black power.
Black power. Do you want to end on that?
No.
Reckless 2.0. Here with your host Vickiss and D-Train. Are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yes. How are you on Independence Day?
Not independent. Still learning. Still on the plantation. But, we're working to correct that. So,
Absolutely.
Putting in work today.
Indeed we are. Today's guest is Mr. Kilo. Mr. Kilo has made some very interesting videos on YouTube claiming that that counter-racism is black supremacy, and he's read the Codebook and has had some opinions about Mr. Falerna's work, and we're having him here just to ask him some questions. D-Train?
Yeah, I guess let's just get into it.
Sounds good.
I had a thought, but it escaped me for a second. So
happens. Let's see. Kilo, is your line is open? Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, and it's actually KKilo.
Okay, KKilo. Gotcha.
Yeah. How do you want to be referred? Your name?
Oh yes, I'm Vickiss, and
Vickiss. Okay. And your partner there?
D or D-Train is either is fine.
Okay.
So before we get into asking you some questions, is there anything that you wanted to let the listening audience know about the work that you do on YouTube and just your background? Anything that you want them to know?
I made a series of videos. It actually started. It's how I started my channel, was criticizing Neely Fuller Jr.'s work. Because he promotes the idea that black people are superior to white people. No, he never comes out and says that, but when you analyze what he's actually saying, the statement is that whites are this inferior race that do not possess black people's high moral values, and you can trace all evil and pain in the world back to white people. And I've drawn many parallels between Nazism and KKK ideology and shown that Neely Fuller Jr. just took their hateful ideas, their racism, repackaged it for black people in America today. And that's basically how my channel started. It's expanded beyond that. Now I become I've engaged in a much wider view of race issues in general, and show that much of these claims that black people are oppressed are in fact just a front for anti-white bigotry. White people are not oppressing black people anymore, and black people's problems result from a culture that deeply embraces defeatism and self-defeating attitudes and behaviors. And that's why black people fail at higher rates than white people, not because of anything whites are doing to black people. And that's my position.
Okay. D?
I guess again, Mr. KKilo, you are a white male, correct?
What is a white person first? Before I answer that question, I know you black supremacists, counter-racists have your own definitions for words. So before I answer that, I want to make sure that we're in agreement as to what white is.
Okay. In my opinion, a white person is a person who is not subject to a racist white supremacist.
Not subject to a racist white supremacist. Well, that would describe most of the people on the planet. So, yeah, I can't, other than a few isolated incidences, the vast majority of people aren't. So I wouldn't say that makes me white.
Whoa. Okay, so you're not a white person?
No, not by that definition, sorry.
Okay, what do you mean when you say white person? Do you self-identify as white? Hold on. Do you self-identify as white?
What's that?
Do you self-identify as a white person?
Well, again, we need to understand what white is. So before I can say I identify as white...
I want your definition. Do you identify as a white person? One. And two, what do you mean when you say you're a white person?
Actually, let's reverse that. Let's start with one, what I mean by white person. And then I'll tell you what I actually identify with. Okay, a white person really doesn't have a firm definition. Generally speaking, it's people who are associated with European descent, but that's not absolute. Many people who are of descent of other places do not call themselves white as well. So there's no firm definition here of exactly what white is. Instead, it's a group of people who choose to be called white. Generally speaking, they have certain features associated with a Caucasoid race, and the more striking those features, the more others will see you as white. But it is true that there's plenty of gray area there with people that don't necessarily look white and call themselves white. Some call themselves black, so I call myself white. And that's what I mean when I say white. It has nothing to do with any system of racism, white supremacy, or anything like that.
Okay, so now we have that there is no system of white supremacy, and I want to read my definition just for clarity for the listeners. What I have is an incorrect and unjust system established, maintained, refined, and enforced by people who classify themselves as white, working to exploit, subjugate, or eliminate all people classified as non-white in all areas of human activity, operating in a local, regional, and or global fashion. So, just to understand what we're talking about when we say white supremacy.
Yeah, I've read Fueller's work, and that system doesn't exist at all.
So there is no imbalance. There is no imbalance between people on this planet who classify themselves as white and non-white. Correct?
Depends on what you mean by imbalance. As I said, white culture in America generally embraces attitudes and behaviors that foster success much better than black culture. Now, this is all individual choice, and anybody can choose to be successful. But black people tend to choose to fail much more often than whites do. So, there is an imbalance, but it's not a result of any oppression or system of racism, white supremacy, none of that.
You do realize that the world is more than black and white, and that white people...
Oh, that's funny. That's not what Fueller says. He says that there's white, non-white, and that's it. There's no other people. Well, there's white supremacists, which is an undefined, unspecified portion of the white population that is doing some kind of evil for which all white people are suspected of, which, of course, is what we call racial prejudice. So Fuller is promoting racial hatred. But
hold on. Fuller says that there's white and non-white. He doesn't say that there's white and black. He says that non-white people are people.
Well, okay, whatever. But whatever. Black people are considered non-white people. So, it's fine that, he has these two categories, but it is very black and white. There's two categories, is there not?
Well, technically, according to Fuller,
so that's black and white. It's wonderful he has another term for it, but it's still as black and white can be.
No, technically, he has three categories of people. There's
evil white people. But there's no evil black people, interestingly enough. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, but there's stupid, dumb, and silly and primitive black people, according to Fuller. So, anyway, we'll get into that later.
But those stupid, primitive black people, of course, are made that way by the evil white people, right?
Actually, I don't believe his book says that.
He actually says that black people are not responsible for their actions under this alleged system of racism, white supremacy. So as a matter of fact, yeah, it is white people who are responsible for any bad behavior of black people, because according to Fuller, they're not responsible. So in other words, all white people are inferior to black people.
I don't think he indicates that in his work anywhere.
Yeah, he does, actually. That's the point.
I believe he has said that white people are collectively the smartest and most capable people on the planet. I don't see how is that saying that black people, non-white people, are inferior. I just don't. I don't see that.
The way first of all, understand there's no place where, like, for instance, Hitler said he only wanted peace. Okay, that's a quote from Hitler. So that means that Hitler only wanted peace, right? Of course not. Actually, if you look at everything Hitler said, there was obviously some desire for destruction, war, genocide, etc. There's no papers that says kill all the Jews, sincerely Hitler. But that doesn't mean that wasn't his ultimate goal. And if you look at all the things he said, it's pretty clear what his goals were, even if he himself denied it. So, yeah, Fuller sits there and says, they're the smartest, most capable people on the planet, but the whole purpose of that is to shoulder white people with the responsibility for black people's problems. It's a way of demonizing white people and making them responsible for all the suffering in the world. It's not actually praising them and saying, they're these great people. No, it's saying, look how great these people are. Unfortunately, they're the only ones that are capable, so if I have a problem, it's the fault of the evil white people who won't help us.
Okay.
So in other words, it's a mechanism by which he does demonize white people.
Okay.
And if you look at all the things he has to say, that's what it's saying.
Okay, so I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Do you believe that a system of white supremacy has ever existed on Earth, on this planet?
Has it ever existed? Yeah, I mean, there was a time when one could definitely argue, especially during the colonial era and in this country up till the civil rights movement, there was a legitimate complaint about oppression that black people faced, undeniably. But that's over.
Okay, so you think that the global system of white domination ended circa 1968, 1970? That would be your
in
estimate.
This country.
Global.
In this country, I'm not as familiar with colonial Africa, but, exactly when countries became independent, so I can't specify. But pretty much, especially in this country, no, racism has no significant hold. And holding racist ideas, especially if you express them, will get you socially ostracized. White people do not tolerate racism anymore. They just don't. I'm white. I should know.
Okay. How would do you have any examples of being ostracized or evidence that, as a whole, that being racist, being overtly racist, will ostracize a white person? And
I have a ton of examples. Let's start with one. There was the case of Denny's. Denny's apparently was accused of of discriminating against some of its black customers, a group of them got together with a class action lawsuit against Denny's and won some $100 million from the corporation. Following that, the corporation launched a multi-million-dollar campaign to clean up its image and convince people that there's nothing racist about it. They were desperate to prove how not racist they were. Then, of course, there's a case of Michael Richards, who, of course, used the N-word successfully during one of his acts. His career was absolutely destroyed because of that. Absolutely. There was a case just recently in Australia where they had this Kentucky Fried Chicken commercial. There was nothing racist about it. It just happened to show black people around enjoying Kentucky Fried Chicken, and apparently they took it as this horrible act of racism. The commercial that was expensive, costed millions of dollars to produce, was pulled and has never been shown again. So those are just 3 examples.
D-Train, you want to take this one?
Yeah. Now let me ask you, if people, both white and non-white, didn't tolerate racism, white supremacy, why is Denny's still in business? Why are people still eating at Denny's? That would be indicative of
because they paid $100 million plus launched a multi-million-dollar campaign to convince people that they're not racist. That's why. They worked desperately to overcome that.
To convince which people?
What's that?
To convince which people they're not racist.
Convince everybody. Convince their customers. Convince the entire country. Convince anybody that had any inkling that Denny's discriminates against its customers. In other words, basically, they saw that they needed to clean up their image, and they did.
Okay, so what
but it hurt them. It hurt them bad.
What would have been easier in the long run? Would it been for Denny's and their employees to not practice racism towards their non-white customers, or to launch $1 million, to spend millions of dollars to make it seem like they're not racist?
To make it seem like, because of course they're white, right? So they'd have to be racist. Anyway, so to make it seem like, I love that. No, as a matter of fact, they really aren't racist. But nonetheless, there was a perception that they were. I don't know all the facts of the case, and there could have actually been a situation where a restaurant or two basically discriminated against its customers, and they had a legitimate complaint. But the fact is that obviously if the company loved this stuff, they wouldn't go to all this trouble. So they were hurt very badly by this and have instituted policies to ensure that it doesn't happen again. So, yeah, it would be easier not to let it happen again. Unfortunately, it did, and so they've done everything they can to prevent it from happening again, which seems strange that they're pandering so desperately to a group of people that you say are helpless and oppressed by some global conspiracy. That doesn't seem like what people do. I can show you all kinds of examples of oppressed people throughout history, and I never once saw the oppressors desperately pandering to the sensitivities of the group that's allegedly oppressed. Never. It's the first time in history.
I would just say that that would be part of the refinement stage of racism and white supremacy, defined by Mr. Neely Fuller, Jr.
So in other words, no matter how non-racist white people seem, and no matter how much opportunity there seems to be, no matter how non-racist things seem to be, they're still totally racist. In other words, nothing is going to convince you that you're not oppressed. No matter how much opportunity, no matter how much privilege, no matter how much comes to you, you're still oppressed. Is that what you're saying?
No, that is not what I'm saying.
Well, then it seems to be. It seems like you're saying that basically they're just refining it. So in other words, it seems less and less racist.
Hold on. I believe there are many, many, many examples of white people attempting to, and you just mentioned it yourself, attempting to convince everybody that they're not racist when obviously racist actions happened, under their guidance or under their watch. There's been
Why
many...
would they sit there and try and convince you that they're not racist if they have so much power over you? Show me a case in history where the oppressors desperately tried to pander to the needs of the oppressed. It's not that you're oppressed. It's that no matter what people do to convince you you're not oppressed, you're still insisting you're oppressed. So it's not that they're more refined. It's that no matter how much they beg and plead, you still aren't happy. That's this whole concept of refinement. Basically, there's so much evidence you're not oppressed, and so you have to rationalize why you're still oppressed, because black people love that victim label, and you wear it proudly on your shoulders, and you stick your nose in the air, and you go, yay, we're victims. And no matter what white people do to convince you we are not trying to hurt you, you just say, well, they're just refining their racism. It's a rationalization to maintain your status as victims, which the question is, if you really were victims, why are you so desperate to maintain that badge? Why do you take such pride in your status as victims?
I don't believe anybody has said I am prideful to be a victim. I am not proud to be a victim of racism. I'm not. It's not. You know, I'm not really like. Excuse me?
Well, you're desperate to prove what a victim you are at every second, no matter what people do for you.
I believe that.
I'd have to say that victim badge serves some kind of purpose in your agenda. So clearly, you do take pride in it. Otherwise, you wouldn't sit there so desperate, no matter what people do for you, to prove what a victim you are.
Okay. I will repeat that I do not take pride in saying that I've been victimized by racism, white supremacy, and I'm not desperate to prove anything to anybody. I believe that the best way to prove something to anybody is by letting them find out. D-Train?
Okay, so you said that you do see evidence of, I guess, white people working to be non-racist. So I guess I would
prove
ask you
that they're non-racist. It's not that they're working to be non-racist. They aren't racist. They're just trying to convince you they are, and black people sit there and fold their arms and go, nope, you're still racist. You're all racist. Everything you do is racist.
Would it be logical, just quick question, yes or no question, would it be logical after, I guess, 500 years of white people mistreating non-white people all around this planet on 6 continents, would it be logical to suspect that all white people could be racist, given 500 years of oppression on 6 continents on the planet?
What you're demonstrating by your question is that you think just like a redneck white racist. See, what they'll do is they'll take, like, for instance, crime statistics in America today, which show that black people do commit, 13% of the population commits 40% of the crime, which means if you're a victim of crime, you're most likely to be a victim of a black criminal as opposed to a white one. And then they say, well, wouldn't it be logical then to suspect all black people of being rapists, murderers, and crack dealers? So in other words, you think just like they do. Yes, it is true some white people engaged in some bad atrocities throughout history that towards black people. But first of all, this wasn't a majority of white people. It was some white people. Secondly...
Hold on, wait a minute. Did the majority of white people condone it, i.e. did... Yes,
absolutely. There was a general tolerance of racism. Absolutely. That's long over. But nonetheless, it's still quite clear that you, judge all people who are white based on the evil actions of the few. Well, then how does that make you different from the redneck white racist that takes crime statistics and says, look, black people are committing all these crimes, let's judge them all based on the evil actions of the few? Doesn't that ignore the fact that the vast majority of black people do not engage in any criminal behavior? Doesn't that ignore the fact that the war on drugs actually ends up creating perverse incentives that give black people longer sentences? All kinds of things like that don't really look at the bigger picture, that there's nothing about blackness that makes somebody more criminal. Well, by the same way, you refuse to acknowledge that there's nothing about whiteness that makes somebody more racist. And so you sit there and you judge us all based on the evil actions of the few, which is no different. No different from any white redneck racist.
Okay. I don't believe this is just a white redneck racist. that talk about this. I'm not sure if you're familiar with a book by Herrnstein and Murray. It's called The Bell Curve. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
I'm familiar with The Bell Curve. It was a huge controversy.
Yeah, I don't believe
a lot of white people dismiss its conclusions, too. And, let me point out one more thing, just real quick. You know how I said, the vast majority of black people are not criminal. And judging black people based on the criminal actions of the few is racial prejudice. In the same way you were doing. Well, in the same way you were doing, too, you were ignoring things like the fact, look at something like refrigerator technology. I know you've never thought of this, but that is technology created by white people. And what it has resulted in is something that no other generation has enjoyed. We have an abundance of food, so much that obesity is a problem. We conquered scarcity. Throughout history, people have had to wonder where their next meal has come from. Because of the refrigerator and many other reasons, we have an abundance of food because we can preserve it longer. So you'll sit there and you'll focus on the evil crimes committed by some white people and ignore all the good things that white people have done.
I believe that Fuller said that white people are the smartest and most capable people on the planet, and that racist white supremacists are the smartest of white people. So I think
but then he turns around and shoulders them with responsibility for all pain and suffering in the world. So by arguing that they're the most capable, he's actually making it seem, like any evil that's committed in the world has to come from a white person. So his argument that they're most capable is really a means by which he demonizes white people. He's not complimenting them. He does not admire them. He fears them. You do not fear those you admire. He is promoting the fear and ignorance of people with white skin. That's all he's doing. And yes, he sits there and throws these little words out. There's a part in the book where he says that you should never judge one race as superior to another. But you look at all the other things he says, proclaiming that black people are not responsible for their actions under the system of racism, white supremacy. That's a declaration of moral supremacy, the idea that black people are morally superior to whites. You are responsible for your action. If a black person acts evil, it's not because a white person made him. It's because he is inherently evil as an individual. And he is responsible for his actions, and no system of racism, white supremacy made him do it.
How are you yourself acquainted with Mr. Fuller? How can you know for sure that, or do you have any evidence that suggests that Mr. Fuller is not educated on racism, white supremacy, and that he's not a victim? I believe in one of your videos you said that he is quote unquote just making it up as he's going along, and that he has no education in politics and he has no credentials. What evidence do you have for those statements?
The greater question is, what evidence do you have that he does? You see, if you look through his book, how many citations does he have to the sources of his information?
No,
answer the question. Answer the question.
Not many.
None. Zero, zip, nada. It's all him. Now, let me ask you this. Okay, go ahead with what you got to say.
I was just going to say, this is a book of suggestions to non-white people.
This is a textbook.
Yeah, it's a book of suggestions to non-white people. I don't understand, based on, I guess, his empirical observations, I don't understand why there has to be citations and why, quoting white people, basically, because, white people had most of the access to education and resources at the time he wrote this book. I don't understand why quoting white people makes his book any more credible.
Let me ask you this. Well, first of all, I have two questions. Let's start with the first one. Now, he says on page 6, the white people of the known universe are collectively the smartest and most capable of all people, and then he says the white supremacists are the smartest and most capable of all the white people. Now, let me ask you, what study or research did he do to verify that this is true? Did he take a group of white people and measure their IQs and compare them to the IQs of white supremacists, or did he base that on research that showed this, that did that? What methodology did he use to make that statement?
Okay, he didn't use any, and I'm going to
there we go.
explain.
That's
okay,
all I
I'm
wanted to establish. Well, first of all, I understand that. Okay, so all I wanted to establish is that it's his personal observations. It's stuff he believes to be true. And the only point I want to make there is then this is faith. This is not science. This is faith. And so Neely Fuller Jr. is promoting a counter-racist cult based on stuff he believes to be true. Now, the second part of the question is he comments on all kinds of scholarly topics, not just intelligence in that case, but law, anthropology, political science, religion, history. Now, let me ask you, let's say Fuller was commenting on astronomy, and he went out in his backyard and he sat down in his lawn chair and he looked up at the night sky and started to describe the nature of the stars and how far away they are and how they're made and what causes them to come, their birth and their destruction and black holes. Do you think he could do that accurately without ever researching anything on astronomy and basing all of his knowledge of space on his personal observations? If not, why do you think he can do that for every other scholarly topic that he comments on?
Because he's speaking about the system of racism, white supremacy. He's not speaking.
No, he's talking about. There's a part in this book where he talks about the different types of political systems, and nowhere does he mention mercantilism or communism or anything like that. He shows no understanding. He just makes some stuff up. Again, if he can't comment accurately on the nature of astrophysics by just personal observation, how can he comment accurately on all these other topics? How can he do that? He's making it up. It's completely unverifiable BS. And it's fine if you want to believe it, but if it is believed, it's believed based on blind faith. So you are, in fact, a religious follower of Neely Fuller Jr. There's no science behind this.
Hold on. Wait a minute. One, I believe that all science has started from empirical observation. I think people that started astronomy
2,500 years ago.
Okay.
So Fuller's about 2,500 years behind us.
But, okay, now what Mr. Fuller is studying, racism, white supremacy, is a relatively new topic, discussing racism as a system.
No. He's studying political science, law, history, anthropology, all that stuff. He's not studying just racism, white supremacy. There's all kinds of topics with lots of research behind it, and he shows no understanding of it whatsoever. So you can't say, well, he's just commenting on racism, white supremacy. Well, he's not, and even if he was, it would still be based on his personal observations.
And
none of those are verifiable. None of them.
All science is rooted in personal observation. And I think that
2,500 years ago. And no, it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop there, and you can't sit there and say, well, that would be like saying that if he sat in a lawn chair and looked up at the sky and speculated on his belief about the nature of the stars, and I were to criticize that, you say, well, look what the Greeks did. That's what they did in ancient Greece. Well, yeah, but that was 2,500 years ago.
Let me stop you real quick. I agree there. What I'm saying is that nobody has analyzed racism and the areas of life as a system. Nobody had did that before Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. did. Not W.E.B. Du Bois, not
Carter Woodson. I'm sorry. And Martin Luther King was definitely analyzing racism and talking about it. So, and in no time do I see anywhere in this book where he quoted Martin Luther King. And he doesn't even show any understanding of any of King's writings. Doesn't quote him, doesn't cite him, nothing. So, yeah, there's plenty of people that have talked about racism, and he shows no knowledge of any conversation outside his own head.
I believe Mr. Fuller has quoted victims of racism, but what makes Dr. King, more credible than Mr. Neely Fuller Jr.? What makes his opinions on racism more credible?
I'm sorry, were you asking a question or a statement?
No, I was asking a question. What makes Dr. King's opinions on racism more credible than Mr. Fuller's? They're both victims of racism, correct?
Well, Fuller claims he is. At no time does he explain how. or mention any incidents from his life to justify that claim. So all we have is a claim. We don't have any verifiable evidence that he is a victim. So considering Fuller is pretty old, chances are he lived during Jim Crow and segregation, so he actually did see those events. But he doesn't mention it. He doesn't describe it. He doesn't explain it. He just makes a statement. And so it's clear he's talking to a group of people he expects to blindly follow him. They aren't thinking critically. If they were, they'd be asking, what evidence do you have you're a victim? And it's fine if you want to believe that he is based on the fact he claimed he is, but then again, that's blind faith. That's religion. It's not science. It's not critical thinking.
Okay. I'm going to read definitions for the word cult from the dictionary, and I just want you to, I guess, match up which definition you think that makes, I guess, people who've read Mr. Fuller's book a cult.
Okay.
So definition 1 is a formal religious veneration, worship. And I've noted that in this case, a Baptist could be a member of the cult. Do you think that definition, I guess, fits readers of the Codebook?
Baptist? You mean the radical Muslims?
No, I said a Baptist.
Oh, a Baptist.
Yeah.
Baptist, yeah, sure, they're cults. Yeah, I would call them cults. They wouldn't call them cults.
Okay. So, do you think that people who have read Fuller's book can fit under the definition of cult from this definition?
Partially, yeah. The main reason I call them a cult is because cults are generally associated with a lot of dogmatic beliefs. Well, the fact is that I have been regularly labeled a racist suspect and a white supremacist from you black supremacist counter-racist. And let's keep in mind, have I burnt any crosses? Have I killed anyone? Have I deprived anyone of a job? The answer is no. All I've done, what have I done? I've disagreed with Fuller and expressed my ideas passionately and argued persuasively that Fuller is in fact a fraud. And based on that, it's said that I cause confusion, which is another way of saying I undermine ideological conformity to Fuller's beliefs. So that's why I say they're cults, because they're so dogmatic and intolerant of any dissent. Oh, counter-racists will argue on minor variations of general agreement, but somebody like me that actually disagrees with Fuller's central tenets and expresses that persuasively, we're labeled white supremacists trying to confuse the non-white people. So it's clear you guys just don't tolerate dissent, and that's what I consider cult-like behavior. And of course, the aspect that the entire thing is based on religious principles and not science.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think that Fuller's book has a lot of constructive suggestions for black people and how to conduct themselves in all areas of activity?
You mean by promoting fear and suspicion and racial prejudice and racial scapegoating and defeatism and futility and this concept of helplessness and the idea that black people are naturally stupid and white people have all these powers so superior to black people and that we just control your every little whim? No, I do not think those are good suggestions.
Would you say that the 10 basic stops for victims of racism, would you say
before I answer that question,
list?
Before I answer that question, let me make one more thing. If Fuller was just providing bad advice, I wouldn't care. It's up to you guys. You guys can decide whether or not to take bad advice. But he's blaming white people. And I happen to belong to that group that's being made a target of racial prejudice. And that's where that's why I express my disagreements. Now, I'm sorry, what was your question, Vickiss?
Yes, I was asking, do you think the 10 basic stops for that victims of racism, white supremacy should practice in speech and or action? Do you believe that suggestions of that nature are constructive?
I can't say they're all just horribly unconstructive. I mean, I think at one part he suggests keeping records or something like that. I mean, he makes the claim that white people keep records. I would kind of agree with that. I mean, we tend to be much more organized, but it's nothing to do with our whiteness. It's just because our culture fosters success much better. So, and any black person can engage in our attitudes and behaviors and be just as successful. But Fuller actually encourages you not to do that. But yeah, I mean, little things like that. If he wants to encourage you to keep more records, yeah, that's, it's not going to hurt anybody. But again, I don't really care. Even if his advice is bad and it hurts black people, or I think it hurts black people, why would I care? I mean, you guys can make all it. What I care about is when he blames white people and creates this racial prejudice towards them. That's where my disagreement comes and why I'm just so disgusted with the things he says. Obviously, I'm personally offended because I happen to be a member of the race that he considers so inferior. Morally,
what is the
morally
white race?
Inferior.
Hold on. What is the white race? What are you racing against? I'm sorry, what? I said, what is the white race? What are you racing against?
The white race doesn't have a specific definition, but it's a group I happen to belong to by an accident at birth.
So, you belong to a race in which you cannot even define.
Well, let me ask you this. If I had a pond, okay, you know what a pond is, right?
Yeah, my feeble brain can comprehend that.
Yeah, I didn't mean to make that sound. I just want to make sure you understand what I'm talking about. Literally a pond, a small body of water. If I added a drop of water to that, does it become a lake?
No, of course not.
Okay, so say I add 100 drops of water. Does it become a lake?
I guess if somebody says it's a lake, I mean, yeah, but...
Wait, whoa, if somebody says it's a lake... Wait a minute. Okay, so wait a minute. What point does a pond become a lake? How much water does it have to have before it becomes a lake?
I don't think there is a definition for how many gallons of water. So
lakes don't exist, right? And you can't say there's any lakes because there's no specific definition of what a lake is. So therefore they don't exist, right?
No, what I'm saying is that lakes, it is completely arbitrary. A person says this is a lake. A person says this is a pond. That doesn't mean that.
And there's never any disagreement over what a pond and a lake is? But yet you can't tell me at what point a pond becomes a lake. I mean, if there's no definition there, then how can a lake exist? If there's no definition of the difference between a pond, a lake, or even a sea. Generally, seas have salt water, but there's exceptions to that as well.
Well, there's no lake supremacy. We have a caller with a hand up, 7012. Your line is open. You're on.
Can I be heard?
Yes, you can.
Okay, greetings.
Greetings, sir.
I'll just ask one right now. Greetings, Mr. Kilo.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the program. What is white culture? Because I heard you use that term when you say white culture engages in successful practices or whatnot. What is white culture?
Yeah, I can definitely define that. Culture, general culture, is beliefs.
I'm sorry. I asked you what is white culture.
Yeah, and I'm going to get to that. Okay, first, culture. Culture is beliefs that individuals adopt, they choose to adopt, in a free society. In unfree societies, you pretty much have to go with the beliefs that people want you to hold. So in this free society, anybody can believe anything they want. Generally speaking, white people have certain attitudes, certain beliefs, certain values they share amongst each other. There is lots of individual exceptions. But I'm speaking of the beliefs and attitudes generally held by most white people. They tend to foster more success than the beliefs generally held by most black people. But again, anybody can choose to believe whatever they want. So we're really talking about individual beliefs. So when I say white culture, I mean the attitudes and values and beliefs that that white people tend to hold more often.
Okay. Can you give an example of a not free society and a free society?
Oh, absolutely. Like, in Saudi Arabia, if you want to believe that Muhammad was an ignorant pedophile, not that I'm saying he is, no offense to any Muslims that might be listening, but if you wanted to hold that belief and express it, well, you would face criminal penalties for it. So in that case, you could hold that belief, but since you can't express it and live by it, you can't call it a free society. So that's what I mean. When I'm talking about this white culture, I mean the beliefs that we're not victims, that you generally don't scapegoat other races for your problems, that kind of thing. Those are not values white people tend to hold. And so that fosters success much more readily than black culture, which teaches that black people are helpless and weak and that they're constantly under oppression of white people and that white people are constantly out to get them. And, it starts with this deep self-hatred, and then eventually they declare their moral superiority to white people. But it's ultimately racial prejudice and racial scapegoating. So those defeat you. And evidence of this, a really good evidence of this I like to use, is if you look at per capita income rates in the South, where slavery was legal and where racism is much more accepted, not totally, but much more, you see that things are generally poor because racism is self-defeating.
Racism practiced by who?
By anybody. Doesn't matter, black or white. But, of course, since the black community embraces racist ideas much more so than the white community in America today, then black people tend to be more racist than white people. And that's one of many self-defeating attitudes that are much more common in the black community. But keep in mind, there's many individual blacks who distance themselves from that and believe their own thing. And they do just fine. They go on to become things like President of the United States, for example. There's many more.
Well, I believe you said that whites don't scapegoat other races for their problems. I find that to be completely false.
Really? I have never met a white person that blames other races for their problems. I mean, I know they're out there. I mean, obviously they're out there. But in my life, in the white people I've encountered, they all find racist ideas intolerable. And if I were to sit there and suggest, well, you know what the problem in this country is? It's those black people. Like, I do not know a single white person that wouldn't be mortally offended by that. I mean, they would absolutely see that as a huge offense. They would just be like, dude, that's racist. You need to shut up. And if I were to express that at my job, I'd probably lose my job, almost certainly. I mean, I might get away with it once. They would tell me to shut up, probably give me a reprimand. If I did it again, I'd lose my job, definitely.
So you don't think making videos about black cultures being degenerate is suggesting that black people are the problem in this country?
No. My videos do not say black people are degenerate. In fact, I make it very clear black people are equal to white people and therefore should be held to the same standard.
Wait a minute. You said that white culture
individual
fosters
beliefs that people choose to hold. Go ahead.
You said that white culture fosters better outcomes.
Yes,
naturally,
but again,
magically compared to black culture.
No, it's not magically. It's that their attitudes and behaviors foster success. And any black person can hold those same attitudes and beliefs. More often than white people, they tend not to. I don't know why. We could speculate that on forever. But any black person can at any moment choose to distance themselves from the helplessness and victim mentality that you see so rampant throughout the black community.
would you have this is
not a statement of the racial superiority of white people or suggesting that there's anything about blackness that leads to failure or criminality or is in any way degenerate. So no, there is nothing about my videos that is in any way suggesting black people are inferior to white people. And I'd like to clarify, at no time do I suggest that any of problems, that white people are in any way oppressed, that they're in any way victims of racism, or that there are individual cases of whites who are victims of racism, just like there are individual cases of blacks who are victims of racism. But there's nothing about those individual cases that can be extrapolated to be said that white people are oppressed and that black people are causing it. That is what you call white nationalism, and them and my serious disagreements on ideology. We have huge disparities between us. Yeah, you can see them on my channel. Sometimes they come over and they start calling me a race traitor because of things I say, that black people aren't inferior and that there's nothing about them that's incapable. That's something Neely Fuller Jr. would argue because he's got to paint white people as responsible for black people's problems. As a matter of fact, I think black people are responsible for their own problems, and they have everything they need to succeed. That's not only their personal capabilities, but there's nothing inherent within their race that would determine their limitations or potentials. And that's also their moral potential. In other words, there's nothing about black people that makes them more morally superior to white people. But the same is true of whites. Nothing about whiteness is morally superior to blackness.
Is that why are you familiar with the Dole test, the Dole experiment, and the Harvard University implicit association test? Are you familiar with those?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Back in like the 40s, during the height of Jim Crow, they did, tests with white children and black children. Which doll is bad, which doll is stupid. And, the results are predictable enough.
Okay, I'm familiar with that test.
Okay, they redid it in 2007. And, similar results.
It's true. For whatever reason, children want to play with white dolls. I could speculate forever on that. But what you do is you take this one little incident where children want to play with a white doll more and extrapolate that to define everything about whiteness. That's what we call racial prejudice. Okay, I'm sorry, children playing with dolls do not say anything about my life or what being white means to me or what it is, what my moral potential is as a person. And that's incredibly offensive to take this one little test. That's like taking the high rates of black crime and saying, look what black people are. It's like, no, actually, you got to look at the vast majority of black people. They don't engage in any crime. So there's nothing, and not only that, when I have these white nationalists arguing that black people are naturally criminal, I point out that the percentage of black population in America has increased over the past 10 years, but the rate of violent crime has decreased. So clearly there's no correlation between blackness and crime. Well, at the same time, you take these little incidences with kids playing with dolls. I have no idea why they choose white dolls over black dolls. Maybe it's something evolutionary. Maybe there's something about it. I don't know. I have no idea. But whatever the case is, I don't play with dolls and never have. So, and when I go to work, I just know every white person I know has absolutely no tolerance for racist ideas, even seemingly racist. As a matter of fact, if any of my colleagues knew, there's a reason why I don't show my identity, because there's no tolerance of my ideas. These are, if people knew I made these videos, I'd be in trouble. They would definitely see me as a racist, and I could face repercussions for it, especially in my professional life. It's unfortunate, but there is this. It's strange. If there's such a system of white supremacy, why are my ideas so socially ostracized? Why do I have to express them anonymously? Well, I do. So, fortunately enough, I am grateful that we have the internet today that allows me to do that, because people, black people in the civil rights movement and the white people that helped them didn't have that. And so they faced violence and repercussions because of it. And if they could have spoke anonymously on their issues, they could have advanced equality much more quicker.
So you don't believe that a widespread negative view of blackness?
Absolutely not.
Even in the language, you don't think that is an indictment on an entire society?
No.
The implicit. I was going to go into the implicit association test. It's actually a website. You can go to it. It's
yes,
sponsored by
I'm
Harvard.
quite familiar with it.
Yeah.
And I do know how it's extrapolated to define all of society. Kids playing with dolls. But, I disagree with that. I don't think that it really says anything. It's an interesting thing to look at and to examine, but it doesn't mean, you can't say kids want to play with white dolls more than black dolls, therefore all black people are oppressed. I mean, that's a big jump. So, but looking at it and asking the question...
What it does say is, if you ask a 4-year-old which doll is stupid, 2007, if you ask a 4-year-old, black or white or non-white, which doll is stupid, and they point to the black one, then that means that obviously in society there is a stigma that associates dark skin with moral inferiority. Intellectual inferiority.
Go ahead. I'd like to respond to that. Hello?
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Okay, so let me explain something to you. I was white. I grew up white with white parents, had white friends. And, growing up, I never, ever once had the black people are stupid talk. I do remember there is no Santa Claus talk and the very uncomfortable where babies come from talk. I remember my friends talking about it. I remember saying, oh, God, I just found out Santa Claus doesn't exist. But never did were we sitting there at the playground and they had, and one of my friends said, yeah, last night my parents had the big black people are ugly and stupid talk. God, it was bad. Yeah, I mean, it just never happened. Okay, so no, I realize that as a black supremacist, you're not going to believe this, but white parents do not sit around and teach their children to hate black people. Never happens. So why it is that a child would see a black doll as stupid, I don't know. But I assure you it's not because of anything parents are doing. And to extrapolate that, to create a causal relationship with events you can't prove are happening or demonstrate in any way are happening is based entirely on racial prejudice of white people.
Okay. I can give you a concrete example. In the job market, it has been proven... It has been proven that candidates with black-sounding names... I'm
glad you're bringing this up. Go ahead. We're going to have fun with this one. Go ahead.
Okay. Are 50% as likely as white candidates to receive a callback.
Mm-hmm. You see, this happens to be the topic of my next video. It's going to be fantastic. Let me explain why that study is a complete pile of gooey BS. Okay, first of all, if you look at the study and the rates of callbacks, are you aware that Todd, the white names Todd, Jeffrey, and Neil are called back about 1/3 as less, 1/3 as less as the white name Brad. Are you aware of that? If you look at the study's data, there is actually Neil and Jeffrey and Todd are called back 1/3 as less as Brad. Is there a system of Brad supremacy? I mean, why would employers have this bias against people whose names are Todd, Neil, and Brad? Are you aware that Jamal and Jermaine, black-sounding names, were called back 50% more than Todd and Neil? Here's my point. Okay, and this is the point I'm going to make much more elaborately in my video that should be up soon. If there is obviously no anti-Todd bias that could explain why Brad was called back 3 times quicker than Todd, then why do you think there would be an anti-black bias based on that? I mean, the same factors that are influencing the rates by which Todd is called back compared to Brad, both white names, obviously there's a lot of random factors here. Obviously, wouldn't those influence also the data between groups? In other words, if there was an anti-black bias, you haven't isolated it. Otherwise, white names would be called back at similar rates to other white names. There's so many factors that are influencing callback rates, you can't say, oh, it must be an anti-black bias. As a matter of fact, Ebony, okay, the name Ebony, the female name Ebony, which means black, was called back twice the rate as the white name Emily. Is there an anti-Emily bias out there? Is there a system of... Kristen was the white female name that was called back the most, and it was called back at twice the rate as Emily. Is there a system of Kristen supremacy? So that study is so incredibly flawed and ridiculous. There was another study that was done at the same time. I can get you the title and the information if you're really interested, but it took some 16 million names in the U.S., and measured their success over their lifetime based on census data. And it found that one's name has absolutely no influence whatsoever on the outcome of their lives. And here's the thing. According to Google Scholar, that study, which came to entirely different conclusions than the black-sounding name study, is cited some 5 times more often than the black-sounding name study. The black-sounding name study is cited 5 times more often than this other study that came to conclusions that your name has no effect on your life. So if there's a system of racism, white supremacy, why would people so deeply embrace the black-sounding name study? Well, the fact is it comes to the conclusion that people like, which is that black people are oppressed. It proves what people want to believe. But when you look at the data, it's a big lie.
Now, I think Vic wanted to ask you a question.
Oh, yes,
I'll just comment and say that 50% also correlates to the double the unemployment rate of black people with college degrees than white people. But anyway, we'll move on.
Yes. Earlier you said that white people are more successful because they foster success more and they have high moral values and a healthy attitude. What evidence do you have of this, and what causes this? What causes white people to have this healthy attitude for success?
Well, the evidence that I have is the many examples I have throughout my videos. Of course, I can't go through all of them. There's 120 videos, and there's going to be more. But let me give you an example. One of the big examples I used, I had a data showing that black med school applicants with average or slightly below average GPAs were favored over white med school applicants with the same GPAs at rates 5 times more. In other words, there is a serious preference for black med school applicants. How many black doctors do you know? In other words, basically, you can give black people an actual racial preference, and they still don't seize the opportunity. So that's one example of many I have where there's actually, disparity. Oh, another one is the research of John Ogbu. He was looking at Shaker Heights, that neighborhood, suburb of Cleveland. It's a wealthy neighborhood that has some high percentage of black people. I forget, it's about 50% black. And yet black students in this well-to-do neighborhood with well-to-do schools still do significantly worse than their white counterparts. So they called in a researcher to try and figure out how those evil white racists are keeping black people down. And John Ogbu, a black researcher from Africa, I forget which country, but he's African, he researched it and found that actually it had much more to do with the black students' attitudes. They saw studying hard as acting white. And he's done a lot of research into this. So there is research to back up the claim that attitudes actually have an effect on on the outcomes in black people's lives. That was the first part of your question. I'm sorry, there was a second part. Wasn't there?
Yes, I was just Well, I was asking, what causes them to have this attitude? What causes white people to just have this, the healthy, moral, successful attitude? What is the cause of that?
Parents. Parents, basically, white parents tend to foster these ideas in their kids more often. So whereas black parents teach their kids that white people are keeping them down, and anytime they face a challenge in life, and I'm speaking very generally, there's obviously plenty of exceptions, but more often black parents will, to one degree or another, instill the idea that if black people face a challenge, it's some unfair situation that nobody but black people have to face, and therefore they should blame white people for their problems. If you blame other races for your problems, it's going to undermine your success. Simple as that. Because you're going to deny yourself the one thing you have control over in your own life, which is your own attitudes and behavior.
And how would you explain this phenomena in other countries, other areas of the world, Australia, Canada, places that do not have the same history of racism, but that have different histories of white people mistreating non-white people? Is that the same reason why unemployment is the unemployment disparity is just as high in the United Kingdom? Is that the reason why 90% of Australia's prisons have black inmates when they're less than 2% of the population?
Well, first of all, I don't know a lot about Europe or Australia, so, I can't comment on what the attitudes there are. I will say, and this is obviously not scientific, but commenters I've had from other countries, black commenters, have held the same attitudes and defended the same victimization. I got this guy, Guardian90. He's actually a really nice guy. I'll give him that. Unlike the American black commenters who disagree with me, he's actually really friendly. But he does totally disagree with me and seems to hold the same attitude, that whites cause all the problems in the world. And so I don't know if black people in general hold the same attitudes in Australia and Britain, because, of course, I haven't interacted with them as much. So I will say, with this one small example, which is hardly representative of the the European and Australian black population as a whole, I've seen the same attitudes. So, yeah.
And why would you say that?
And I would say one more thing. You mentioned prison disparities. Those are a result of the war on drugs. Okay, and it's the war on drugs. That's what causes it.
The war on drugs in Australia? In
that's
UK?
Okay. Huh? No, the war on drugs is a global thing, dude.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. So it's everywhere, and yeah, it's. I don't have time to go into it. I'm actually almost out of time here. I was only supposed to do this for an hour, and unfortunately, I do have to be going here pretty quick. But I could do a whole program explaining how the war on drugs creates the disparities within the criminal justice system. So it's not really motivated by racism, but I will say it is a de facto racist situation in that black people bear the brunt of the unintended consequences of drug prohibition. But I do have a video called Legalized Drugs and End Black Racism, which goes into this.
Okay. And do you have time for 2 more questions?
Yeah. As long as I can get out of here, in about 10 minutes, we're good.
Okay.
Train, go first.
Do you agree? I guess kind of piggybacking off that other question, worldwide there seems to be a correlation between positive social factors and skin pigmentation globally, from Brazil to Mexico to the United States to Australia. Can you explain the phenomenon? I know somebody that says, if you go to a country and ask, where are the black people? They're always going to be the poorest, collectively. They're always going to be the poorest, the most...
the white people living in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, I think, would disagree. But I will say this, of course I don't know every situation in every single country and exactly, what the various factors are. I have covered Africa quite a bit. Africa is a big, giant welfare state. And, I don't have time to go into explaining how all the foreign aid, which is $1 trillion since 1970, that Africa has received in foreign aid, how that destroys everything about Africa. But to put it simply, here's how it works. You send 1,000 mosquito nets over to Africa, you just put a mosquito net maker out of business. So now you have to send food to feed his family and all his employees. And then, at that point, all revenue is coming from foreign governments. So, of course, the governments there become puppets of the United States and other countries that feed them all this aid, And that leads to widespread corruption, because why should the governments of Africa care about their people when all their money comes from everywhere but their people? And so it creates just this huge situation. And until we cut off all the aid to Africa, you're not going to see Africa see any kind of upward mobility until that happens. And there's also the situation with economic liberty, which I don't have time to go into either, but basically nations that have more economic liberty, which is the freedom to set up businesses and operate businesses, tend to be more prosperous, whereas centrally planned economies or governments that are heavily involved with regulations and so on and so forth with the economy tend to be poor. And so that causes a huge disparity right there, at least between nations.
Okay. I just had two quick questions before you go.
All right.
One is, are you intentional? Excuse me?
I'm sorry, what? Am I what?
No, please go ahead.
No, I'm asking, what were you saying?
Oh, yes. Are you intentionally mispronouncing Neely Fuller's name?
In my earlier videos, yeah, I had his name pronounced wrong. So I do know it's Neely Fuller Jr.
It's Fuller.
Isn't it? Oh, Fuller. Okay, well, okay.
Wow.
So now I know.
Wow. And the next question is, can you give us your thoughts on Mr. Tim Wise?
Oh, God. I have no love for the guy. He's a disgusting anti-white bigot. He goes around promoting the same idea the Nazis did, which is that the wealth of this race that he hates, white people, is a result of evil exploitation, which is the same idea Fuller holds. But, yeah, it's the same idea the Nazis held. I mean, basically, I have a whole video on this. It's called White Privilege is a Racist Concept. It is. It's the same idea the Nazis lived by. So, yeah, that's about all I have to say. I do have an older video on Tim Wise, but at the time I didn't know anything about him, so many of my opinions expressed in that video have changed. I have a much more negative attitude of the man.
Do you think Tim Wise is, in his own efforts, being deceptive in any way?
Oh, absolutely. He's a lying sack of crap.
Is he being deceptive towards non-white people?
No, towards white people. No, he's a total liar. I mean, he makes up the most silliest arguments that he can't defend, and then anytime he gets into a debate, he storms off. I mean, it's so ridiculous. And the man is just ridiculously anti-white. I mean, he's such a racialist. It's pathetic.
Tim Wise, the admitted white supremacist.
He's not an admitted white supremacist. That's how you guys treated him. He did not say, I'm a white supremacist. At no time did he say that. He said something you guys interpreted as an admission of white supremacy, and then you proceeded to berate him. I do have to say, though, that episode was hilarious. I mean, I love to see Tim Wise, getting beat up by the monsters that he created. So it was really beautiful to see him being mistreated by black people the way, I mean, you guys were so rude to him. I mean, it was just astounding. It's like, this is a guy who's basically on your side, and you crapped all over him. It was like, man. But he deserved it. So
real quick, and it'll be really fast.
Oh, please.
Yeah, I really got to go here. So this will be the last question.
It's just a yes or no. Can white people harm massive numbers of non-white people? Yes or no?
Can white people what?
Bring harm to massive numbers of non-white people.
That's like asking me, can a group of black people get together and hurt white people? Yeah, they can. People can hurt people. It doesn't matter. There's nothing about whiteness.
Okay, that's good. Yes, okay. Can black people or non-white people get together and harm massive groups of white people?
Oh, absolutely. You see this happening in Zimbabwe. Fine example of what happens when black supremacists get power. They act just like white supremacists. So they rape, they kill, they steal. It's terrible. Black, yeah. So yeah, there's nothing about blackness that makes you less harmful than whiteness, and likewise, there's nothing about whiteness that makes you more harmful than blackness. That's all racial prejudice, the notion that somehow black people are less harmful than white people. That's entirely racial prejudice. That's a statement of black supremacy. It says we are superior as a race. We are more innocent. We are more morally pure. We are more righteous than white people because we can't harm them the way they can harm us. Oh yeah, you can. Oh yeah, you can.
In mass numbers?
In mass numbers, absolutely.
What is justice to you?
That's like something you can't answer in just 3 minutes, But basically, yeah, it's equal opportunity. But keep in mind, equal opportunities do not promise equal outcomes. So if you create an opportunity for black people and they don't seize it, it's not injustice at all. It's their own fault. So justice does include personal responsibility. But before I go, I do want to say, you guys really were polite to me, and I do appreciate it. You guys pleasantly surprised. So I do appreciate that.
No problem. Especially considering us being referred to as monsters. But, hey,
Yeah, well, I get called white supremacist and racist suspect, so, yeah. But anyway, I do appreciate the time, and I thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you, sir.
You gentlemen have a good day.
You do the same.
Bye-bye.
Reckless 2.0. Monsters.
What? So we killed a lot of white people in Zimbabwe? We exterminated them? I didn't hear about that. I would think that if that happened, that would be everywhere.
Headline.
Oh, yeah.
They
killed
I heard one incident. Yeah, Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say they killed one white person. Now, I think this was incorrect. I don't believe in torture. Basically, they were redistributing land from, the white people who stole the land from the black people there. And this guy absolutely refused to give up his land. So they imprisoned him, and, the rest is history. Now, what the correct thing would have been to do is probably to contact the UK and see if you could get him deported on their dime. I think that would have been the correct thing to do.
In large numbers.
Yeah, mass numbers.
In Zimbabwe, they rape, they steal, they kill. It just sounds like he was just going down the checklist of what niggers do.
And I would have loved to ask him where in the Codebook does Mr. Neely Fuller attempt to dehumanize white people? Because of the comparisons to Adolf Hitler and whatnot. So where's the dehumanization? Where's the hate? Where is the hate? And, I just, whew.
I mean, I agree. I mean, just two quotes from Fuller in the section of politics that kind of shows that, Fuller, well, let's go. Avoid attending any meetings, assemblies, etc. of any kind in which white people are not welcome at all times. Number 2, do not speak and or act to try to establish black supremacy. Subjugation of any person based on the presence of color or non-color in the appearance and or general makeup of that person is non-just and incorrect.
Man, that's some serious hate right there.
Yes. And he didn't even know his name. How to spell, pronounce his name.
When he has the book and it has his name on there.
Nellie Fuller.
Oh.
Stop.
And I also would have liked to ask him if he could explain how non-white people do not depend on white people.
Yeah, I had tons of questions to ask him. We just didn't have enough time. One was, had he ever had sex with a non-white person? And that was another question that I had. Are white people dependent on non-white people for anything on this entire planet?
Exploitation, maybe?
Yeah, and are non-white people dependent on white people for everything on this planet? I think that would have been an interesting response.
They're just not seizing the opportunity. It's just blatant. This is heavy refinement in attempted counter racism, and
I forgot to ask him the chimp out question.
Oh, man. You can still send him a message on YouTube and probably get a response. He was pleasantly surprised that we weren't two drooling beasts. and there were a lot of times where he just would say, "Well, I'm not aware of that," or "I'm just not well versed or qualified enough to explain that." But yet he's has 200 plus videos, vehemently bashing and calling out counter racism and counter racist. Had some nasty things to say to Mr. Sin Q, and it's just incorrect. And he's heavily practicing racism. White people don't have to be well versed on the history of racism. They just know that they're white, what other people are white, and how to treat non-white people.
Yeah, I mean, I never got that. This is why black people are bad speech. You don't have to get that. I mean, you turn on the television, go to school. I mean, you don't have to be taught how to be racist 101. I mean, it's inherited. Just like he said, the reason why black people don't engage in successful behavior like white people is that they have deep self-hatred issues, which, starts their racism. Well, I wanted to ask, where do we get that deep self-hatred from? What causes that?
Who is the most responsible? I mean, even as Gus says, it's embedded in the language. I mean, racism, white supremacy is in the language. Oh, he's a shady character. Oh, he's black-hearted. It's in the language.
Black sheep. Blackballed.
Black male, which, blackmailed in Mandingo, had to reference it again. And also not just English, don't forget about that, with, Negro and Moor. It's consistent.
I also found it very surprising that he said that there were no constructive suggestions, and he kind of skated your question when you asked him about the 10 stops. But
of course,
said there was no constructive suggestions in Fuller's book for black people.
I have a feeling he didn't read the whole Codebook.
Yeah, I think it said in one of his videos he only had access to, I think, maybe the first 10 pages or whatnot.
That's significant.
He seems to be very refined in I think he studies counter racist. I think he studies to heighten his level of refinement. Some of the terms he uses. I mean, just everywhere. I think he is attempting to spread confusion. He would say that, that's typical of what counter racists would say, but I just think some of the terms he uses, some of the analogies, I mean, the one where if Mr. Neely Fuller tried to map the stars or whatever. Well, we don't live in the cosmos. We live on Earth and directly deal with white people. Like, I mean, Mr. Fuller's been in war. You know, I think his observations would be more valid than if you were trying to make observations about the solar system.
And I guess, did you guys...
I'm sorry.
I was going to say, did you guys get what I was saying? Fuller published a book, one of the first books of its kind, on how white people function in regards to non-white people. And that I was saying that all science is based on empirical evidence. People have been studying the stars for, like he said, well, actually, it's been more than 2,500 years. I believe the Egyptians have been studying for about 8,000 years. But, you know, if Fuller published a book, the first of its kind, then he would have to start from empirical visual evidence.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Oh, hold on. Oh, wait, no. I can't believe that. And he was practicing, I think, of course he was practicing racism. And I believe that some of it was not refined, in that it was pretty overt. Just saying that white people have high moral values.
It was a blatant contradiction.
Yes.
And he just said that Neely Fuller Jr. is saying that white people have, low moral values, and the exact same thing. So it was just, he came on air and he was really just exposing himself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a blatant contradiction. It's, oh, well, black people are just as good as white people, but white people have better culture than black people. Like, what? Like, does that make any sense?
White parents tend to just foster and value education and success more, unquote.
Right, when the black parents are staying in a so-called upper class, neighborhood, and apparently have the same outcomes or similar outcomes to those white people. So I don't see where there's a cultural inferiority or anything there. Now, I also find that this is an interesting pattern that I've seen in racism and white supremacy, that white identification, adopting white values, gets you better treatment, or proximity to white people or proximity to white people's ideas gets you better treatment in this system than otherwise. For example, the people in Haiti, poor, destitute, poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. People in the USA, black people, 10th highest economy in the entire world. So not only is it a so-called racial color thing, there's also proximity and white identification.
And, yeah, I agree.
What shade of black you are as well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he answered the question that I asked about the the positive correlations between lack of skin color and positive social outcomes everywhere on this planet. I don't believe he answered that question either.
I was just about to say that. I think he in fact was trying to, he said, ask the white people who live in favelas in Brazil.
Yeah.
Now, I've never been to Brazil, but I've seen a couple of documentaries about how they work black people there, and from what I gather, it's the darker people who live in the favelas and the lighter people who live in the city area But he might have been to Brazil. I don't know.
Yeah, it sounded like he was saying that that Brazil was majority white people, or that those are the people. Look at these people living in the slums. It's like somebody from Brazil saying, oh well, look at there's 5 white people living in Harlem, so therefore they're repressed. Things like that. It's not. It's not valid. It's a very specious argument that white people love to throw out there.
I mean, it's just not honest.
Mm-hmm. And I just find it funny how he could ask, well, what citations does Mr. Fuller have? I mean, a lot of what he says, he doesn't have citations to back it up. Like, what's his citations for the black self-hatred that causes us to be so-called racist or black supremacists? What's your documentation on that? I mean,
I also found it interesting that he said that the preference for light skin may have been evolutionary, but then in the same sentence suggested that doesn't mean that there's an anti-black bias.
I caught that too. That evolutionary.
Whenever white people bring up evolution, it's going to be dripping with white supremacy.
I mean, I don't understand how you can say, oh, well, there's a pro-white bias, evolutionarily acquired, but then say that in the same sentence that there's no anti-black bias. That doesn't compute. If people are saying the black doll is stupid at 4 years old, black people and white people, then I think that is a higher indictment on the programming that the larger society gives to all people, white and non-white.
His explanation is just it just happened that they just took this one test, this one procedure, and then blew it up, even though you just told him that they did this back in the 50s and 60s, and they did it again 3-4 years ago, and there are the same or very, very similar results. And I also think it was very interesting that he mentioned that just because Neely Fuller Jr. does in his in the book that he didn't finish reading, that he says he gives no evidence of he himself of being a victim, but then goes on to say, well, he was alive during the Jim Crow era, and he might have witnessed it, but he doesn't go into detail about his personal experiences. Which, why would he go into his personal experiences in a textbook, workbook?
For everybody.
He also said that he has no degree, no background in politics, or no educational credentials. Even though he's given lectures, at accredited universities.
University of Maryland, I believe.
Yes.
Given several lectures there.
And he's definitely well respected by many scholars. And just the fact that he would say, well, he has no education for this, he has no justification or citations, and like Caller just said, he didn't. Many of the the questions that were asked of him, he would say, well, I can't explain that because I'm really not familiar with the global context or what goes on in other countries, and he's not aware of many things. So it's just I just found that interesting. It sounds like he hasn't listened to any of Mr. Fuller's lectures, or maybe he has and he's just just in denial, or he just got caught out there. But it seems that heavily practicing deception and covering up.
Agreed, and I think you can put a cherry on top of that in his response to or his reflection on Tim Wise. He didn't have a utterance of questioning Tim Wise's scholastic achievements, but he did go into heavy name calling. So that, to me, that says if it were white people he was talking to, he would be name calling Mr. Fuller as well.
That's very true.
And that he can, it's much easier for him just to verbally dismiss a white person as a bigot or whatnot, because they're on the same team. And really, they have the same, I think overall goal, which is to confuse.
Exactly. Just hearing a white person say, "Oh, look at this is a white person saying that another white person is racist because they are saying that white people practice racism." And just think about the image of that confusion that what happens to a non-white person when they see that and are much more very, very confused about the system of white supremacy.
I've seen less, I think more confused people, non-white people trying to counter racism, engage in debates with Mr. KKilo. And, I think they have been a bit uncouth. And so maybe I can see where he would got this idea that we would have been yelling and, going crazy. But,
maybe. I think it's just, he thinks that we're, just the way that he's, if you listen to the condescension in his voice and things that he said, I really just thought that, he thought that we were going to yell and get angry and things like that. Even in the correspondence we had before setting up this program, he's saying, well, this is the last thing we're going to agree on. And okay, you said you're going to keep it, formal and cordial, and things of that nature.
Oh, what I really found interesting is that he said that other white people would find his videos as racist, so he had to conceal his identity.
Exactly. I was thinking, I didn't even know he was concealing his identity. To be honest, I didn't know he was concealing his identity on purpose and intentionally. And other white people, he's doing this so that other white people don't think that he's racist. And wasn't he just saying that Denny's, was paying all this money to stop people from thinking that he's racist? Essentially, doing the same thing. Lots of projection.
Perhaps we can get him back on for like 30 minutes just to discuss Robert Mugabe. I'd be interested. Well, I have viewed that video, but I'd be interested more on his thoughts of how Mugabe exactly is a black supremacist.
I like how he also said, I know you haven't thought of this, D-Trade, but, the refrigerator is white technology.
I think Fuller always says, white people have done a good job of making the trains run on time, but, they've done a lot of incorrect things in that process, and that you don't have to mistreat people to make the trains run on time. So if they are the smartest and most capable people in the universe, naturally even, that doesn't give them the license to mistreat people.
D-Train, are you, or any of you guys proud to be a victim and trying to convince everybody that you're a victim and proud of it?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I say I'm a victim. I say there's a system of white supremacy. You know, if whoever doesn't agree, white or non-white, no problem.
Yeah, agreed. I don't think any victim should dedicate time to trying to convince anybody. And I'm definitely not proud to be a victim.
A black person actually had an argument with me about this a few days ago over Facebook. Note, I said he had an argument with me because I told the truth, and I said, you know, we're all subject to white people. And you know, he just starts going off, oh, you're weak, and he said that I needed to be, quote-unquote, eliminated. And,
wow.
Yeah, this is exactly what Fuller's talking about.
Wow. How did that his argument conclude?
That was the last thing he said before I said I'm discontinuing the conversation. He said, what have you done? And I listed a couple of things that I've done personally to counter racism. And he said, he made like a sarcastic remark, keep on fight the good fight, brother, or something like that. And then he said raise his fist or something like that. And, you know, I just didn't reply after that. I told him I was discontinuing discourse with him. Kept it moving from there.
Minimize that conflict.
Yep. I've gotten the same thing from non-white people and white people when using the term victim or speaking the truth about injustice, white supremacy. Pretty much the same thing. They'll throw they'll name call you angry, call you racist, bigot, saying, you're letting the white man hold you down and this and that, and you're not going to get anywhere. And, I disagree. I say that the only way to get anywhere is to, have an understanding of where you are now and what's going on, as opposed to just denying it and pretending that it doesn't exist. But yeah, I get the same thing. Arguing from other victims, which I usually don't engage in. I just try to give them things to think about. But I think they know they're a victim. They just don't want to admit it to themselves. Because it's hard, like Pam says, it's hard truths, and it can be overwhelming and put one in a state of powerlessness. But I think in that and understanding that is empowering. Understanding that black people are in a collective state of powerlessness, I think is empowering. And I mean, for anybody to argue with me that black people aren't in a state of powerlessness, I mean, I just refer them to Hurricane Katrina every time. I mean, what can you say,
I believe a white nationalist, what is that guy's name? Anyway, he said something very interesting about Hurricane Katrina. He said, look at Katrina, when, white people disappear, all civilization disappears. And, as racist as it is, black people are kind of lost because they are completely dependent on white people. I mean, white people control our access to energy. They control our access to water, food. all over this planet. And to and to say anything else is just inaccurate.
Yeah, we're ungrateful niggers.
I think I suspect that Mr. KKilo would concur with that. I believe that he said that black when he said black privilege, and then he went on to say about the grad students getting in at a higher rate for medical school, and saying that this is a privilege and it's just an opportunity that black people aren't seizing. And he said that if there was a system of white supremacy, it went all the way up until the civil rights movement. And I didn't get a chance to ask him. I want to ask him what happened during the civil rights movement to stop the system of white supremacy and change. It was just white people just had a change of heart, and all of a sudden they're it's not racist anymore. They're not racist anymore, and we're talking about almost close to and probably over 1,000 years of this attitude, and definitely 600 years of this system, and over the course of 40, 50, 60 years, he's saying that all of that is just it's done, and that these opportunities are now presented. But he did say that equal opportunity doesn't guarantee an equal result, and he just blames it on that we value being defeat. We have a defeatist mindset, and it's just a complete incorrect. He's absolutely trying to fine tune his racism against counter-racism. And he said that he's mostly offended, and he's mostly doing this because he feels he's white, and he's essentially defending white people. And I just found that very interesting, because when you first asked him, was he a white person, he got very apprehensive about it. He says, well, I'm not really a white person by your definition. But then later on, he got a tinge of it defensive, saying, well, I'm a white person, and we're being demonized, and things of that nature. And he can't even define what a white person is.
Great case.
All he knows is that he's a white person. And he said that. He just says, well, look, I grew up white, friends were white, and that was that. And, by a mistake by childbirth, I'm white. And, but then he said Caucasoid race earlier on. It's just...
I guess I wanted to ask him, since black people engage in all of these unhealthy behaviors, which I actually concur with, what difference does it make if you have a person, Mr. Fuller, that is offering constructive suggestions for black people to modify their behavior? What difference does the framework that is presented in make to white people? Why do white people care about how black people feel about them?
Because if they don't like them and they don't accept the mistreatment, then that threatens, the foundation of who they are. And they either know this consciously or unconsciously, and this is the result. This is the reaction to. And it's not all white people who practice racism in this way, but there are white people who practice racism in this way, and this is how this white person is practicing racism.
And it seems, to adopt white, quote-unquote, cultural values is basically him suggesting that we surrender to white supremacy. Wave the white flag, and, we can all march on as one people while we decimate the rest of the non-white people on the planet. And I'm just not down with that.
He essentially said this, and he definitely essentially said he gave kudos to black people that do give in to white identification. And he says that white people, don't. There are black, I know there are some black people who are successful because they don't, sign up for the defeatist or defeated attitude that the majority of black people have, not knowing, what the statuses are of all counter racists or where they are in life, but he does make that assumption.
I think it's a particularly deceptive assumption because a lot of black people that I've seen that aren't that are in dire straits, so to speak, are very confused about racism. And perhaps if they understood how to work within that framework, work within that system, they could be better off. If they read Mr. Fuller's Codebook and, understood how to function, don't steal from people, don't play with laws, don't kill, don't rob, then they would be in a better position.
Definitely. And that would contribute to correcting the problem overall. And I think that's what Kilo is there to
prevent.
Yeah, yeah. Because why go for Mr. Fuller? If everything he's saying is valid, then he wouldn't have to say it in the first place. He wouldn't have to make videos. He could just worry about white people like Tim Wise, Robert Jensen, Maggie McIntyre. He would focus on those people. But I think just by him, it's just telling. Just by him focusing on the non-white counter racists, I think that's an attempt to confuse non-white people as opposed to him focusing on so-called well-to-do white counter racists, which I think would be if he did have a genuine, if his efforts were genuine, he would be, to me, trying to debunk the white counter racists so that white people wouldn't be confused. But by him, attacking Mr. Fuller, Mr. Senku, pretty much all counter racists, calling us monsters, I think he's trying to actually incite what he speaks about. Like, he's trying to incite for us to mistreat him, uncodify us, so to speak.
And you notice how he doesn't say anything about, more rowdy black folks. He focuses on Mr. Fuller specifically, and I think that's extremely interesting. Considering that Mr. Fuller has made no threats against black people, he's made, to my knowledge, no indication that he wants black people to separate from white people or anything. He just says replace white supremacy with justice. He doesn't say kill white people. He doesn't call white people crackers. But he's specifically focusing on Mr. Fuller. And apparently he knows of the irritated genie of Southeast.
And used in one of his videos, used him as an example of a black supremacist.
So why is he focusing on Mr. Fuller?
And again, a book that he did not completely and fully read. He also had we didn't go too deep into it, but he definitely had pretty nitty-gritty scrap with Mr. Sin-Q, and was practicing racism very heavily, and name-calling very, very heavily. And I think that if you're attempting to speak on, a topic that he has to hide his identity for because it's something that's so, high stakes, there's no need to, to degenerate the conversation down to, calling people pussies and things of that nature. Just really, tacky and trashy tactic, And just essentially, if something does not have the white stamp of approval, it's not valid. It's been said time and time again. If Neely Fuller does not have, a degree in racism from Harvard, then it's not valid. It's that Negro science, pseudoscientific bullshit.
Yep, pretty much. I mean, it just still, I guess, bewilders me. Well, not bewilders me. I mean, I understand exactly why he is focusing on Mr. Fuller, a victim who encourages black people to engage in constructive activity. I guess rather than bashing people who, advocate things such as, harming other black people.
He did mention black slavery. That's definitely on the checklist. One of white people's favorite gags to use is that they were sold into slavery and black people profited off of the slave trade.
The funny thing is a thing of reparations, I guess. So-called West African countries. Mm-hmm. I know they were discussing this a few years ago. Were considering, opening up their, letting Black Americans, settle in West Africa. And the interesting thing about this is that, here we have these victims, at least discussing some mode of compensation for past wrongs. But these racists here, these white racists, aren't, saying anything. It's amazing.
Oh, yes, and there's also 90 seconds left in the live broadcast. If you'd like to call in, you can dial 917-889-2965. That's 917-889-2965. I guess I would ask both of you, do you think that we'll be seeing more of this as counter-racism evolves, so to say, or as it develops? Do you envision more white people specifically attacking the Codebook, and things of that nature?
Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
Do you think that more white people, we will see more white people attacking the code and counter racism as it grows and evolves, just like, and we'll see more people like Mr. KKilo?
Oh, of course. I think that anything that is constructive, I suspect, in undermining global white domination, white people are going to have a problem with. So when you have anything that refines racism, white people aren't going to have a problem with. So when you have people who go out in public and make rash statements about mistreating white people and such, there's going to be a bit of outrage, but there's not going to be, a huge backlash, because it actually, in my opinion, refines their system. It gives justification and says, look what these beasts are going to do if they ever gain any power. We need to keep our foot on their necks. Mm-hmm. But if you have, non-white people who are saying, we don't need to be worried about white people. They can come to our discussions. And in fact, no secrets. Replace white supremacy with justice. By any means possible. Then you're going to have, white people who are going to vehemently want to crush any of this type of sentiment. And by this opposition effort by white people also refines their system, because it then suggests that any black person or non-white person who speaks honestly and truthfully about the current imbalance of power on the planet, now it's saying that, any non-white person who even speaks honestly about this is now a racist, according to white people. So that refines their system, because then it discourages people from telling the truth. And telling the truth is, one of the first things that needs to be done in order to, eradicate this problem.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I couldn't say it any better. Mm-hmm. Could not say it. They want any type of counteraction. They want it to be more confused, more blatantly violent. So, like Dee said, it would justify them, refining their system, contribute to the dehumanization process. But non-white people, black people, thinking, speaking, acting, correctly in a manner that promotes justice without creating new problems, they don't want that. And they'll do their best to throw monkey wrenches in, I think to incite for us to act like them, their projections.
I think that's just very interesting. I don't know if he ever used the new Black Panther Party as a example, but I just think it was interesting over that, and just the fact that he did reference the Irritated Genie's work.
It seems like if you just have characters of radical blacks. Like I said, white people just aren't going to oppose that type of behavior. They could, they'll say, "Oh, this is racist," but they won't make any concerted type of effort to oppose that behavior, because it does justify their system.
Do you think? And I know you've seen the trailer. I'm not sure if the caller's seen the trailer for the movie Gates of Hell with the quote unquote black terrorists that will be coming out soon. There was a trailer for that, and it was the anti-abortion film, and I think that this definitely ties into having it so that look at these these beasts, this definitely justifies the system, and it also justifies their complaints of President Obama, especially while he's in office. Like we got one of these niggers in charge, and look what they're doing. And I've heard that from very more less refined races.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be justification for them to make a move, or for the moves they make. As Dr. Wilson said, back in Nazi Germany, they would say these exact same things about Jewish men, that they would rape German women and things of that nature, or like Mr. KKilo said in the Bad Boy, they rape, they steal, they murder, things of that nature.
Right. It just seems like justification for whites to go back in and take over.
What did you say the name of that film was?
Gates of Hell.
Okay.
An anti-abortion movie attempting to to stop black genocide. With those of you who have listened into and seen Mayapa 21 know what that's about. And I just see white people. This film, of course, made by a so-called Jewish white person, is using that as to his own advantage, and using it as anti-abortion ad essentially. And on the flip side, it also gives the image, because just the imagery of the black male with the black mask on and the Uzi, just ready to to assault white people, just tapping into that white fear while they have a black president. I see that ramping up, and I definitely see how it corresponds with KKilo's. You're just a black, you're a black, you're a black supremacist and you're a racist because you mentioned the mistreatment that occurs every single day.
Well, he also said that Tim Wise wasn't an admitted racist. I'd read the letter that he wrote. He did admit to being a racist in the letter. And apparently he does listen to the cows. Interesting.
It was like, you guys tore him up. The same monster that he created.
In other words, we should be praising Tim Watt. We should be flabbergasted at the fact that this white man is telling us, truth. He's on your team. Like,
you should guys
eat him up.
You're slapping him in the face, and he's trying to help you. He also had to create a new screen name because a few of his videos were getting flagged by people complaining of his overt racism.
I do not like censorship. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
I agree.
So whoever these black people are that are flagging his video, I think this is very constructive information if you're not confused about racism. So I don't know if we can get in contact with these people and tell them not to flag his videos, because I do think you can extrapolate, and maybe it's white people flagging his videos.
I would not be surprised. I would definitely not be surprised that he's not practicing racism in a correct manner. A little bit too overt, especially white people. White people would know how overt he is. For a more confused non-white person, they may take what he's saying to heart and may side with him, but they might not be able to see how overt he's really being. But he's being pretty out there with his claims.
And he really fits into a nice little niche where he's kind of like, unique. In the fact that I just think it's all spreading more confusion when you have all of these different schools of racist thought. Because if you have all of these schools, then, it may be logical to assume for a confused non-white person that, one of these schools of racist thought is, white people.
He also said he got called a race traitor. I just thought it was interesting that white people were coming to him and telling him that there are white people who were telling him also that he was not being racist enough. And saying it was called a race traitor because he thinks that he said that he made it appear so that he thinks black people are quote unquote equal, whatever that means in his words. But he said that, and he got white people saying that he wasn't racist enough.
He reminds me of the spokesperson, I guess, for regular white people. What most racists probably are like, the sentiments that they have, the thoughts, how they function. He seems like the spokesperson for the everyman of racist white supremacists. And I really don't think they have a voice. I think you usually hear more overt forms, and you hear more refined forms, but you don't hear this latent form. I haven't read Dr. Barbara Trepannier's book, Silent Racism, but it would seem that these are the people that that she's talking about.
Oh, definitely. These people are definitely, and she's one of them. She's one of them. And she got caught out there where she even flipped up herself and she was, just wanting to embarrass a poor white lady, came out with that. That's the kind of, that type of racist she was definitely talking about, and I definitely agree. And it's definitely a part of the refinement stage. Heavy part. I also found, I was reminded of, I believe it was Black and White Britain. I believe, was that the name from Dr. Twine?
Yeah.
And one of the people used in the study and that was spoken about was that, when the white girl said about her mom that was interviewed that she doesn't really know a lot about racism. She just knows how to make it appear so and use words in the correct manner. And I really think that applies to Mr. KKilo. That he doesn't know a lot. He doesn't even have to read the code book. He doesn't even know how to correctly say Neely Fuller's name. All he has to know is that he's not a non-white person, and that he's a white person, which he said was born white, grew up with white people, and this is how to practice race. This is how to treat non-white people, both directly and indirectly. Subtle. Subtle things, the way things are said, how he spoke with us, shocked and surprised that we didn't take the bait that he was throwing out there.
Just interesting conversation. Wow. I don't even know where to.
Yeah, I know.
And that cultural inferiority thing is this is refinement. Now, we're all equal. You're just culturally inferior.
That's why I thought the question was so great when he was asked, "What is white culture?" And he's essentially tried to he pretty much skated around around that, because earlier he said white people have a healthy and high moralistic culture. So when he was asked, well, what is white culture? And that's why I asked him, well, what makes white people have this this healthy and fostering success attitude?
Especially because, given the context of history, I think that historical evidence proves that white people do not have a moral and healthy culture. I believe they disintegrated 500,000 people in a fraction of a second in Japan. That's white culture.
And glorified it.
Yeah, we got those Japs.
And had non-white people, black people supporting it.
Exactly. And see, this is what refined racists want. They want, and I guess I can only speak for this area of the world. They want black people, non-white people, to identify with white people here. So they do want some sort of quote-unquote unity. I don't think they're lying about that. I think that again, you're still going to take the back seat to white people, but I think it's almost like they're recruiting more people for their, I guess, imperialist, racist, white supremacist army. So, if you adopt all of their views on the world, now you're directly instead of indirectly contributing to the mistreatment of non-white people around the world. So now you can go. It dehumanizes other non-white people that may not live in a so-called Western white society, because now you're looking at them like, oh well, they're savages. I have license to mistreat them because they're not civilized like this white man that we live with. And so this whole notion of cultural inferiority, and just come over to our side. But if we come over to your side, we already see what's happening, where you're basically exterminating non-white people overseas. Not something I can get down with.
Well, definitely agreed, and definitely I think today being July 4th makes it definitely significant that you mentioned that, and it's just a lot of this concept of patriotism. It's just and this concept of
our country. Our military. It just baffles me when I hear black people say that.
Because it's hyper refinement.
Oh, exactly. I heard white people say that yesterday. It's just this view of my country. It's and I think it's just it's part of the way that white people love instilling that conditioning of, and it's just this whole concept of this is a part of my group. This is where I am in my country that I want to defend. And I heard somebody say that yesterday, and I don't know. It feels it just feels awkward and just just hearing a non-white person saying my country. But it doesn't. When I hear a white person say my country, I do understand what they're speaking about. They're speaking about the system of white supremacy in their country, where is ultimately the system of white supremacy and all white people. So that's what they're saying when they're saying defend my country, or at least that's certainly how I interpret it when I hear them say that. So when I hear a non-white person say we have to defend my country, they're saying I have to defend my prison, I have to defend my plantation. It's a Meade catching Cicero. Because he thought it was right. And when you're lied to, just like with with Santa, when you're lied to, you have no except for we're using logic to really question what's going on, you really have no recourse when you're lied to, especially when you're in a childlike state. You can lie to your kids and say there's a monster under the bed, and he'll believe you regardless of what logic is. And and he has no other, and just you could tell them that things, reasons or explanation for things, and they will believe you if that information is intentionally forced upon you 24/7, not just through TV, but just through your very culture yourself. Your culture is just a reaction to racism.
I just think when white people talk, no matter what side of the American political aisle they are very clear. They are very clear that, this is about white domination on this planet. And, the more I think about it, they are very clear about that. And they just want non-white people that live in this area of the world to sign on to that idea. It's already been established to really maintain the status quo on this planet. And that, we're going to get a couple of extra biscuits on the plantation because we're subjects to, we're loyal subjects instead of the niggers all around the world. And just white people just make this extremely clear. I'm going to have to go back and listen to this conversation again, but cultural inferiority, ethnocentrism. I think that's what white people are trying to get non-white people in this area of the world to conform to, white ethnocentrism.
Agreed. Sometimes you're, and you conform to that and you don't even know, and then you're like, what did I just do? It's very difficult especially being in this area of the world, and just the methods that white people are using. It's just very, very, it's very deceptive, and it's very pervasive. And then everything you learn is that, and just hearing. I heard a lot of my countries this past weekend because of the 4th of July. They're like, we got to celebrate our country. I'm more patriotic than anybody else here. I love my country, and it's just you want to ask them a couple of questions about about that, and you just could see the confusion that they're given. But again, when you're lied to for so long and everybody's believing and soaking up the lie, it's quite easy to think that.
Mhm. Definitely. Yeah, I definitely think it's like the whole Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy thing. Just accepting these so-called holidays, basically accepting white supremacist culture and identifying with it. I think all of us were there at one point, just being under the system. But I think when you get to a point where you're able to question things and think for yourself, I don't see how a person could logically come to the conclusion where this behavior supports the well-being of black people. And I think that's where the childlike element of who we are comes out. We want to believe that Santa Claus is real. We want to believe these things because they give us comfort in that ignorance. and we don't want people to, quote unquote, ruin it for us with the truth. You know, so I don't want to hear the truth about Santa Claus. I don't want to hear the truth about the 4th of July. You know, I want to eat chicken wings. I want to, you know, pop fireworks and celebrate so I can be, quote unquote, happy. You know, well, they don't understand that happiness is not it's dictated. It's actually white happiness, because you're celebrating white people's dominance basically, and then you're making them double whammy happy because they see you a victim celebrating this shit. I mean, that would make me happy if I seen the people who I was dominating celebrating me dominating them. That, you know, wow.
That's absolutely correct. Like and I wonder, you know, and I'm sure white people, that makes it even more enjoyable. Like, we're all in celebration of us. You know, they came to, you know, the person I hate came to my birthday party.
With a present.
Exactly. You know.
Oh man. The largest genocide in history, and white people have superior moral values, and we're supposed to celebrate it.
I got on the Illusion of Inclusion DVD from the World Horizon. They show a news report. I forget this doctor's name, but he's on the O'Reilly show, Bill O'Reilly. I forget this guy's name, but he basically says that everywhere Western culture, i.e. white culture, white supremacy goes, where there's, you know, zero crime, zero dropout rates, you know, zero teen youth violence, where they begin to show Western programming, have Western education, that has an impact, and that society starts to degenerate. So, I mean, that's proof, you know, enough for me. Where they go, they destroy. And I mean that, not to name call, but they are a cancer on this planet. I mean, you know, just look at nature. Everything in nature reproduces itself. You know, but they have a homosexual culture. They're promoting this. They're projecting it on to non-white people as a so-called natural, normal behavior. You know, making laws for it. You know, it's non-constructive. It doesn't reproduce anything. But, you know, if one understands the agenda, you know, and I mean, like it was mentioned earlier, to have people pay for everything that they should, you know, be given naturally, or at least have to work for it naturally to attain themselves. Not for white people, but just to work at, you know, farming, building your own shelter or whatnot, which, I mean, of course, you know, a lot of people aren't given those skills, but they've come and taken the place of nature and said, you know, you have to pay me now. And but yet everything in nature ceased to destroy what they create. In fact, it ceased to destroy them, you know, themselves. You know, so I mean, I don't think they're morally anything. When I mean, they're cancer. That's my view.
Plague. I agree.
Oh yes, I think that the problem is, you know, well, not a problem, but one of the problems is that they do see themselves as morally superior. A lot of them do, and I think Mr. KKilo is a perfect example. He just said we're morally superior, and that's the only reason why. Essentially, that's the reason why, you know, non-white people are at the bottom.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's just a blatant contradiction. He's, you know, ranting and raving about how Mr. Fuller sees black people as morally superior, but, you know, he goes and says, you know, in the same program, you know, white people have superior moral values. Like, and I don't believe Mr. Fuller says anywhere in his book that white people are morally inferior to anybody. I don't see that expressed anywhere. So,
I also see a part of what DeCola was just saying, a part of their, their tendency to take the place of nature as part of their God complex, and they have to be the the person that you're getting something from. White people, there have been tons of cases where white people will come in and intentionally destroy, degrade, your society, your group of people, whomever you may be, and then to build you back up, you have to get everything from them. So they break you down just so when you're bringing them back up, you're praising them and essentially seeing white people in the place of God. And this is not just with slavery, not just with colonialism and what happened to Native Americans throughout so-called Native Americans, both North and South America. They now have an appreciation for this new language, an appreciation for something that people are now clamoring for. So now the vision of success is to be closer to a white person, living like a white person, living around white people, marrying somebody who is a white person or looks closer to a white person, having diction like a white person, et cetera, et cetera.
I don't like quoting people who I suspect are racist, but when I was more confused and I used to listen to Eminem, he said something very interesting in one of his songs with Royce the 5'9". He said, when I'm going to hell and I get ready to leave, I'm going to put air in the bag and charge people to breathe. And this is what white people do. I mean, they get water from the river and they charge people for it. This is my water. I'm God. It's just ridiculous when you really think about it.
Create hell and charge you for a cup of water. Wow,
Shake them off the planet.
the whole concept of whiteness just needs to go.
Yes.
You can't move on with this concept of people being white. It's got to go.
That dependence on white, that has to go as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think once that dependence goes, then But I think for the dependents to go, we have to, like Gus says, change the way we see them. Not us, but confused victims. Get a historical context of these people. The Jews have one, so-called Jews have one, of Nazis, and I like to use that analogy a lot with victims who are more confused. Why worship the God? Embrace the culture of, your historical genocider, rapist,
And I think Cree makes a great point when she says, and I don't know if I agree that these people are different, fundamentally different from us physically, but they place a value on being different than everybody else on the planet. And we at least need to acknowledge the fact that they think they're different than everybody on this planet, and we need to deal with them accordingly.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And
I don't think a transformation. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. No, go ahead. I was just saying it raises a lot of difficulties and confusion when non-white people act, how they act, because that contributes to the refinement stage. Oh well, black people kill black people. We really have to get a sense of, or at least establish a better understanding of what it is to be black, or a victim of white supremacy.
I think that's all it is. Just gaining that understanding. What is a black person? Victim of racism. What is a black person? A victim of racism. What is a black person? A victim of white people. Just getting in that understanding and saying we need to establish a planet where there are, no black people. You can maintain your African culture. You can maintain anything that you want, but there shouldn't be any racial classifications. Like Mr. Fuller says, universal man, universal woman. Still being African, but why are you in a racial classification? And that's no matter what your skin tone is or your physical characteristics.
A lot of racists will say, well, if white people were gone, or saying that white people weren't here, there wouldn't be racial tensions, and things of that, genocides, and that what has happened wouldn't have been, if white people weren't here. And I'm like, well, before white people came around, there was a lot of free movement of people to places. People coming from Africa and going to South America for trade. Statues of Africans over in South America and Mexico, and people with that phenotype, because that's all it was, just people with that phenotype. They were part of their quote unquote culture, but they just had they had a different thing. It wasn't a racial class category, and based on skin color, and lack thereof, until white people came around. So I would say that evidence suggests that white people themselves are the problem of racism. So whenever I hear the typical racist codified response of, well, racism is just natural, and this would happen even if we weren't here, this is complete bullshit.
It's not true. It's simply not true. I think even before, and you can even see this before white people became white people in Europe, that they were warring with each other all the time. They had no concept at all of what race meant, and they definitely didn't unify to mistreat other people based on skin color. So, without white people, there is no racism.
Agreed.
You can just look at European history and look before they created their system. What were they doing? They were going and feuding with each other, fighting and killing each other. Just like I'm sure a lot of other people on the planet.
Yeah, they were actually living in horrible conditions until black people came and lifted them up out of those conditions, basically, when they had their Renaissance.
Yep. Black Plague.
And then the Black Plague. I was mentioning to D-Train earlier that the rough years, the rough estimation of the Black Plague, definite not only corresponds with the beginning of the racism, white supremacy, as a system, and especially because it wiped out 50 to 60% of Europe's population during that time.
Yeah, I've heard 2/5 to a half. Yeah.
And I just also think that this is notorious for white people. Just the Dark Ages, the Dark Ages is the years roughly correspond with that whole period, with the time that the Moors came and left. The centuries definitely, the period that they say is the Dark Ages. It corresponds when the Moors were dominant. So white people are always leaving clues and always labeling it by color. So this really is, especially now, how it's how it's becoming, now that it's a system, they always reference it based on color.
I have some documentation. If y'all wouldn't mind me reading it, during the time of the Black Plague in Europe.
Mm-hmm. This
is from the book Dirt: A Social History as Seen Through the Uses and Abuses of Dirt by Terrence McLaughlin. This is on page 28. Human and animal dung and household rubbish all discharged into streets and left to find their own way to the river or the town ditch were supplemented by the byproducts of slaughtering and butchering. Many cattle were slaughtered in the St. Nicholas shambles in Seacoal Lane. The meat that was not sold immediately would be preserved with coarse salt. Powder beef, because of the grains of salt, just like corned beef, is called after the corn-like grains of curing salt, and packed in the tubs. St. Nicholas, after whom several slaughterhouses and shambles were named, was famous for having revived children who had been killed and salted down in a time of famine. After the meat had been prepared and sold, there was a residue of entrails and dung which was piled up on the edge of the Fleet River, waiting for the rain to wash the rubbish into the water. So, this book just goes in on basically what they were living in, how filthy they were, how the queen would take like pus from everybody's sores, and they would like mix that up with a stew and like give it to the queen to drink. Just like horrible, nasty shit. The queen would like purposely not bathe for like 4 or 5 years, just all kind of stuff. And it just reveals how backwards their thinking was. They thought that by sleeping with dogs and all of that they wouldn't get disease and fleas. Just backwards thinking. And also how they kind of hint at how the Moors came through and bought them the Turkish baths and stuff, and the Romans or whatnot. But yeah, it's a pretty disgusting book. But it's their nature. It's their nature.
Entrails. Interesting. Do you see that any correspondence with white people attempting to do what the Moors did, but only in a way that mistreats the people? That's why that's why they have to break people down first, so they can build them back up and feel like they're the Moors, because they're just craved to be a black person so much.
Yes.
I think this could be a direct consequence of the Moors coming, and I guess, I think it could be a direct consequence. And even though, to my knowledge, I'm not sure whether the Moors did anything incorrect while they were in Europe, but just wanting that power and trying to satisfy their egos. Well, yeah, now we're the most powerful people in the world.
I think that's how they establish their royalty, is by interbreeding. And then once you get those the black genes, and you rabbit-proof fence it out, so to speak.
regarding of breeding, this is one of the questions that I had to ask him. One of the questions is, I've heard of white people regarding race as an extended family, and that racism is quote-unquote natural because it is looking out for one's own. Given the small number of people who actually belong to the white race and the prominence of inbreeding in Europe's nobility, do you think this meaning of race only applies to Europeans, since technically Indians and Semites are Caucasians as well? Unfortunately, he had to leave before.
I would have been interested in his answer.
Because, I mean, quite honestly, before that period of time, I guess just going back to what I said before, I don't see anybody, white or non-white, regarding themselves as a race. And judging by the behaviors of people, while the system of white supremacy has been intact, I still see no evidence of any non-white person acting as if they are a part of a race. Or maybe a few, I guess, people who think they're a part of a race, but there's nothing prevalent. I guess it just goes back to what is a race and who are you racing against?
Nature.
Anti-H, and I don't know. It's just I remember if DJ, you remember when Sachs was here and speaking about the natural tendencies, the unnatural tendencies of white people. And he kept trying to say that well, what is natural and everything, what is nature, and it's true. He still wasn't able to explain the unorthodox and anti-nature attitude by white people, which is self-admitted by many white people. And I do see the correlation with the deviant sex, which is the act of producing them, as I do see that as a main, a clear what's something that's clearly evident in how unnatural they are. Just even the act of making of the versions of them is unnatural. It's not normal. It's definitely abnormal. It's not the norm. So just even in their numbers, there's they aren't the norm. Having white skin is not normal.
Well, I subscribe that we're not even the same species, so I really don't. I look at something that is one with nature. It's something that the sun either replenishes or give life to, and the sun doesn't give life to them, and they don't give life to anything on the planet. They are anti-life to me, and we know they're anti-justice, but I don't consider them to be in the same species as us. The reason we act like them, of course, we're dominated, and we've become them, unfortunately. But we're still those people, the original people, I think, of nature. And it's just a lot of things right now are just out of balance, out of order, and they contribute to that.
Greatly. And like I said, that could be true. White people have access to all of this so-called genetic information. I think they have the most access and the most say, and they can pretty much say whatever they want. And, I guess it's up to us to judge whether they're bullshitting or not. And this is why I recommend that, we have black people that go into fields such as genetics and, to make these, to figure out these questions that we do have about white people, because they do seem to act as if they're not us. And their behavior on the planet suggests that as well.
Agreed. Could be possible. And certainly, I definitely think that having more non-white people in these areas, that which is essentially the boardroom of white supremacy, one of the boardrooms of white supremacy, one of the areas of evil activity. Just get in there and someone who, I'm sure there are tons of non-white people in the field, but a non-white person who is less confused, I think, is the key. A person, coming, still having that, still knowing that you're in a system of racism, white supremacy, and still doing, attempting to be whatever white people have deemed as successful. I think as long as you're aware of your condition, you can be empowered, and therefore you can come up with constructive results.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to read a quick, a quick couple of sentences on Che Guevara when he went over to the Congo to attempt to quote unquote liberate them from their from the colonial powers that were incorrectly influencing them. At one point, Guevara considered sending the wounded back to Cuba and fighting in the Congo alone until his death as a revolutionary example. After being urged by his comrades and pressed by 2 embassies sent by Castro, at the last moment, he reluctantly agreed to leave Africa. In speaking about his experience in the Congo months later, Guevara concluded that he left rather than to fight to his death because the quote-unquote the human element failed. There was no will to fight. The leaders are corrupt. In a word, there was nothing to do. Guevara also declared that we cannot liberate by ourselves a country that does not want to fight. A few weeks later, when writing the preface of the diary he kept during his Congo venture, he began, "This is the history of a failure."
Quick question, because I know there's a big confusion around this. Was Guevara a white person or a non-white person?
You'd have to ask him, but you can't. There was certainly times that he was treated as a non-white person. He was mistreated, but that doesn't mean he wasn't a white person.
Yeah, so I was always been a bit confused about that. But
I always saw him as a non-white person, but it doesn't mean that he wasn't a white person, and I'm the one who's confused because I'm not white.
Yeah, the true words that he spoke right there.
Oh yeah.
I think Harriet Tubman said something.
Oh, please go ahead.
I think Harriet Tubman said something very similar to that. Just when dealing with individual slaves. That you have to convince people that they're slaves. And that they need to be free. I think, what did she say? She would have saved thousands more?
Thousands more if they knew they were slaves.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? I don't know. You see it, and you see lots of it. And that's, just not knowing that you're a slave. When you're a slave, that's the best thing as a slave master. You don't have to worry about this dissent. They'll defend you. They'll, fight to the death that you're not hurting them.
Mm-hmm. I know we've coined this term Negro Saxonism, so I I wanted to spend kind of just a program discussing what we mean when we say Negro Saxonism, because I think it's a very special form of white identification.
Yes, it is. I think we could definitely do a program on definitely on Negro Saxonism. I definitely think that form of white identification is it's definitely different. I would say it's definitely different, but it's very pervasive. You see it in a lot of victims.
I think I read a book recently by maybe a Negro Saxon called Racial Paranoia. He even talks about Dr. Creswellsing in that book.
Oh, really? What does he say about her work?
Well, he doesn't call it pseudoscience or anything. He basically just gives his critique, of her work and the book Urugu and a couple of other works, and just tries to equate them to what he calls, racial paranoia. And just he's an anthropologist. I forget his name, but just buckets and buckets of words. Confusion. I mean, like I said, he sounds like, would fit you guys' description of a Negro Saxon. Because I noticed just a contradiction in the book, saying that, racism exists and yada, yada, yada. Basically saying that black people have a reason, like it's logical to be suspicious, but then calling that suspicion paranoia. That's a contradiction to me. So
it is. And what is the name of this book again, and who's the author?
It's called Racial Paranoia, and I'm looking for it right now. I think it's Jackson Jr. Hold on one second. I'll look for it.
Okay. Oh, yes, John L. Jackson Jr. There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, and the book is 1 cent. Definitely, I'm going to have to check it out.
Yeah, I suggest probably finding it at a library.
He's around, probably maybe get him on the program.
Yes.
There's 2 minutes left. Just stating it. Anything to close out with?
I'm good. Replace racism with justice.
Agreed.
Yes, we'll be back. Reckless.